Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Opening statements begin in the trial for the death of Ahmaud Arbery.
And as Mr. Arbery runs toward him, he pulls up the shotgun and points it at him.
The prosecutors describe Arbery's last moments of life while the defense fires back.
Made him willing to put himself at risk to help the police detain Ahmaud Arbery.
And an unexpected outcome in a cold case murder trial.
Realize the jury was unable to reach a verdict on the other counts, and that is a perfectly acceptable way for a trial to conclude.
Plus,
the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder of a law enforcement officer.
A verdict is issued and sentencing is set for this weekend. Could convicted cop killer Markeith Loyd avoid the death penalty again? And later, first-hand account of the Kenosha shooting.
It was just surreal. It was, I felt scared about what was going to happen.
We head inside the courtroom of Kyle Rittenhouse's murder trial. Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I am Imran Ansari, in for Brian Buckmeyer, who is in Georgia covering the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial. Here in New York, I am joined by co-host Terry Austin. After weeks of jury selection, opening statements begin in the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial. Gregory and Travis McMichael and William Roddy Bryan all face charges of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault for the shooting of the 25-year-old jogger. Prosecutors say that the father and son, Gregory and Travis McMichael, followed Arbery in their pickup truck as he ran near his home in Georgia back in February of 2020. Travis McMichael shot and killed Arbery, and he's claiming self-defense. Bryan followed along in his own vehicle, recording on his phone. The trial is being held in a courthouse in Glynn County, Georgia. That's where our very own Brian Buckmeyer is now joining us. And Brian, we finally heard the highly anticipated opening statements in this trial. Tell us what you heard down there in Georgia.
Imran, assumptions and driveway decisions. That's how the prosecution started their 90-minute opening statement. And that's what they laid out. The assumptions that the McMichaels and William Bryan made of Ahmaud Arbery and the decisions they made from their driveway. Bob Rubin, the defense for Travis McMichael, said the case was about facts and highlighted that there was tensions in the community and that days prior, Travis McMichael confronted Arbery and believed that he was armed when he says he saw Arbery reach for his left pocket. And that's why they chased him on the 23rd of February with guns. Frank Hogue, defense attorney for Greg McMichael, highlighted many of the same points as Rubin, but added that the assumptions of who was in the construction site was right. William Bryan's attorney, Kevin Goff, preserved his right at an opening statement to after the prosecution's case, and the trial moved on to its first witness. With an enhanced photo of the shooting, the prosecution highlighted the moment before the deadly shooting of Ahmaud Arbery as Travis McMichael stood there with his Remington 12-gauge pump-action shotgun.
Was Travis McMichael raising up his shotgun? That Remington 12 gauge. Look how far Mr. Arbery is. Mr. Arbery's under attack. He's being driven forward by Mr. Bryan in his pickup truck. He's running away from this pickup truck that's already tried to hit him 4 times toward the McMichaels. Travis McMichael is out of the car with his shotgun. And as Mr. Arbery runs toward him, he pulls up the shotgun and points it at him.
Travis McMichael's defense attorney then highlighted an increase in crime in the neighborhood and that Travis had a duty and responsibility to help.
This is the family and community that Travis McMichael felt a duty and responsibility to during the course of events in 2019 and 2020. This is the family and community that made him willing to put himself at risk to help the police detain Ahmaud Arbery. Crime had gone up. It wasn't violent crime. It was property crimes. The kind of crimes that are unsettling. The kind of crimes that are scary.
So, Brian, we heard opening statements from both McMichael's attorneys, but new information we're hearing is that William Roddy Bryan's attorney is reserving opening statements until after the prosecution presents its case. Brian, what does that mean moving forward?
So what that means is that we're already starting with the first witness, William Duggan. That's the officer who showed up at the scene, and we're seeing his body cam video. I'm being told that even one of the jurors is shielding their eyes because it's so graphic, and even Wanda Cooper-Jones can't watch it. But after the prosecution puts on all of their evidence, only William Roddy Bryan's attorney will have an opening statement at that point. Then the defense will put on their evidence, and all parties will have a closing statement after that.
Brian, we are all watching to see how this plays out. Thank you for your great reporting down there in Georgia. So this week on Law and Crime's Cop Tales and Cocktails podcast, Sergeant Sean Sticks Larkin and ICU nurse Howard Doss sit down with former New York police officer Jason Lacayo. Let's take a listen.
He was a two-time felon, so this would have been his third strike, and he would have went up north and never seen the light of day. So he basically tells the kid that stops him, you know, my partner at the time is like, listen, bro, I'm not going back. And they start fighting. So they get into a tussle and they fall down a flight of stairs. My then partner snapped his femur.
For everybody
Okay.
that doesn't know, that's the largest bone in your body.
The bone in your body.
Yeah.
And when I'm telling you it breaks, you can hear it snap like a chicken bone. You hear it. And when I heard that and the scream that came out of this dude's mouth, like I start bolting down the stairs and we're chasing this dude. And I mean, we chased this dude about 3 or 4 blocks, jumped on him. And when I'm telling you, like the adrenaline, I could barely breathe by the time we got to this dude. And he was still putting up a fight, man.
So you can listen to the latest episode of Cop Tales and Cocktails on Apple Podcasts now, or wherever podcasts can be found. And still ahead here on the Law and Crime Daily, a sentence will be handed out soon for convicted murderer Markeith Loyd. But first, a decades-old cold case murder still without a resolution. What a mistrial means in the case of Colorado versus Steve Pankey.
It was the video that shocked the nation. An unarmed black jogger, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, gunned down in broad daylight.
We are going to make sure that we find justice in this case.
The 3 men charged will now stand trial.
I told him stop till he hit me. I had nothing to do. There's nothing else I can do.
You're a passerby coming through?
Nah, not necessarily.
That's my son that shot him. I was at the back of the truck.
Starting October 18th, watch live Gavel to Gavel coverage on the Law and Crime Network.
Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily, and a case nearly 4 decades in the making ends with an unexpected twist in the cold case murder of a 12-year-old Colorado girl.
So, ladies and gentlemen, realize the jury was unable to reach a verdict on the other counts, and that is a perfectly acceptable way for a trial to conclude.
In a shocking outcome, a Colorado jury declares a mistrial for 70-year-old Steve Pankey. Pankey is accused of the murder of 12-year-old Janelle Matthews, who went missing back in 1984. She was last seen going into her Greeley, Colorado home after a school Christmas concert. Matthews was declared legally dead in 1994. Her remains were discovered in July of 2019. That's when her cause of death was determined to be a gunshot wound to the head. Pankey, who previously ran for governor of Idaho, was a person of interest in the case at the time of Matthews' disappearance. His ex-wife told investigators that in the days following the disappearance of Pankey showed unusual interest in the case. He also lived a few miles away from Matthews' home and was a pastor in her church. Pankey was indicted by a grand jury more than a year ago, and his trial began in October. While the murder and kidnapping charges ended in a mistrial, the jury did find Pankey guilty of false reporting to authorities. This is based on direct testimony given last month by Pankey himself.
So the truth is that I made a lot of stuff up out of bitterness for things that happened to me at Sunnyview and for things that happened to me at 7-Up. And my revenge on them was to, and because I hated the police, it was all in one to say, I've got information that you want and you can't have it. It was a polite way of flipping them the bird. It was pure hatred on my part.
Okay, let's break this down. Joining me is my co-host Terry Austin and also guest Bernarda Villalona, also an alumni of the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office like myself. So Terry, I'm going to start with you. This isn't the verdict we were expecting. What could have caused a mistrial in this case?
You know, I sort of did expect this type of verdict. It was not an easy case for the prosecution. The one verdict they did come back with was the admission to lying, and that's because he admitted to lying. And so the jury said, okay, we're going to find you guilty as far as that's concerned. But I think the rest of it, the kidnapping and the murder charges, were very difficult for the jury. There was no hard evidence in this case. So they had no DNA, they had no witnesses. And I think that the character of this particular defendant played a large role. He ran for governor more than once. He was a pastor in the community. And I think it was hard for the jury to say this type of person would have kidnapped and killed a young girl. And they didn't see any hard evidence. And they just decided, well, look, we're not going to. They followed the law. They had more than reasonable doubt, and they could not come to a guilty verdict on those charges. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and Bernarda, what's the next step here, given that this case ended in a mistrial?
So since this case ended up in a mistrial, what the prosecutor is going to have to do is they're going to have to reevaluate the case, reevaluate the evidence. Does it make sense to go forward and retry this case? What would be the likelihood of conviction when you're dealing with a cold case? Because the only thing that is going to change between this trial and a new trial are the jurors. So the prosecution is going to have to make that hard decision. Do they retry him, or do they just leave the case as is and just have him sentenced on the lying charge?
We'll all be waiting to see, and we will see if there will be justice for Janelle Matthews to come. But coming up here on Law and Crime Daily, Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. Witness testimony details how victims were acting the night of the deadly shootings in Kenosha. Plus, the verdict is in. Markeith Loyd is guilty in his second murder conviction, but is a death penalty conviction in his future? Our legal analysts break it down coming up next. Welcome back. A sentence will soon be handed down to convicted cop killer Markeith Loyd. As Law and Crime Daily reported this week, Loyd was found guilty on all 5 charges in his second murder trial, including the first-degree murder of Orlando Police Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. Loyd gunned down Clayton while she attempted to apprehend him for the murder of his pregnant ex-girlfriend, Shodea Dixon. Loyd was previously found guilty for Dixon's murder and sentenced to life in prison. He avoided the death penalty in that case, but now he faces the death penalty again. His second murder trial lasted for 8 days. The defense called 11 witnesses, including the defendant, who took the stand for nearly 3.5 hours. He maintained that he was acting in self-defense. Sentencing is to take place this Saturday. So let's break this down. Bernardo, I'm going to start with you. This is Loyd's second conviction. He dodged the death penalty in his first murder conviction. What are the odds that he avoids it again?
So I don't think that this time around he's actually going to dodge the death penalty, because with this jury is well aware that he was convicted of killing Shodea Dixon, as well as an unborn child, and also shooting her brother. So I think with that extra information, that actually worked so against him, that the jury's going to have a different perspective in regards to the death penalty, because unlike the other case, this case, they know not only did you kill a woman and almost killed her brother, but you also killed another woman who so happens to be a police officer.
Yeah, and Terry, during the sentencing phase, we will hear victim impact statements. Who do you think we might hear from?
Well, there's no question we will hear from Deborah Clayton's family members. And we know for a fact that her husband was in that courtroom almost on a daily basis. And Seth Clayton will absolutely have some words to say, particularly since we know that Loyd directed some comments towards him. So I absolutely expect that he's going to say something. And he's going to mention the fact that they had a son, Johnny, who will now be raised without his mother, and that will be a very serious impact upon the family. I also expect, Imran, that we might hear from some of the police officers who were involved in the case or who just know Deborah Clayton, certainly the individual who was shot at that Loyd attempted to kill. But I also think we're going to hear from the sheriff in this case. He previously made comments saying he could not wait until Loyd was sentenced and Loyd was convicted. And I think that he'll probably have some comments to make during these statements.
Right. 2 convictions. And we know that Florida is not shy about handing down the death penalty. So when we come back, the contentious case of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. We hear firsthand witness testimony from 3 men, all there the night of the deadly shootings. Welcome back. Testimony heats up in Wisconsin as day 4 begins in the trial of accused Kenosha shooter Kyle Rittenhouse. 18-year-old Rittenhouse faces multiple charges, including first-degree murder, reckless murder, and attempted murder, following the August 2020 shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Prosecutors say Rittenhouse shot and killed Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber and injured a 3rd man. Rittenhouse's team argues that the defendant was acting in self-defense. At the time of the shootings, Rittenhouse was only 17 years old. Alongside Rittenhouse, the night of the shooting was reporter Richard McGinnis. He testified what happened the night of the shooting.
It was just surreal. It was, I felt scared about what was going to happen, what I would have to do after that, because I knew, that I had what I had seen. I became more worried once I realized that my phone wasn't recording.
Why do you say that?
Because that made me realize that it was my eyes that saw it, and that rather than just being able to show, I'd have to tell.
Like you're doing today?
Yes.
The jury also heard from military veteran Ryan Balch, who met Rittenhouse the night of the shootings. Balch testified that victim Joseph Rosenbaum made threats to both of them before the shootings.
When I turned around, Rosenbaum was right there in front of my face, yelling and screaming, and I would say, dude, back up, just chill. I don't know what your problem is. And he goes, you know what, if I catch any of you guys alone tonight, I'm gonna kill you.
And he said that to you?
Correct.
Did he say that to the defendant as well?
The defendant was there, so yes.
And as far as you could tell, the defendant was close enough to hear what Mr. Rosenbaum said?
That is correct.
Jason Lukowski also met Rittenhouse the night of the shootings. He confirmed with defense attorneys what Rosenbaum's actions were leading up to the shooting.
He is yelling, shoot me, and then he uses the N-word.
Yes.
So he's saying, shoot me, N-word, shoot me, N-word.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And to set the backdrop here, he's saying this at a protest for an African-American man who was shot by police.
Correct.
All right, so let's bring in Terry and Bernarda. Bernarda, I'm going to start with you. The use of social media and live streams have already proved to be a key player in this case. Does all this evidence help or hurt the prosecution's case? What do you think?
So from the beginning of this case, I feel like the defense has been benefiting more than the prosecution on this case, because every witness that they called thus far the defense has been able to profit off of them in terms of creating some kind of seed of doubt as to the charges. Because you're like, okay, so yeah, this happened. I'm not sure. He was the initial aggressor. No, I wasn't in fear. No, Kyle Rittenhouse didn't do this. So while they pushed the ball a little bit for the prosecution to prove their case, they are also helping out the defense. And it's also clear to see that from the witnesses that have testified that you can tell that it feels like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place on whether they want to cooperate or whether they want Kyle Rittenhouse to be found guilty in this case. I honestly feel that the two charges that probably are made out definitely so far is the one having to do with the firearm, being that he possessed it and he was under the age of 18, which is just a misdemeanor that carries up to 90 days in jail, as well as the breaking of the curfew order.
Yeah, I agree. And Terry, several witnesses who went to the protests with Kyle Rittenhouse were trained in the use of weapons. Could that hurt the defense or help it?
I actually think that's going to hurt the defense because you heard Jason Lukowski say he was a U.S. Marine Corps and he was trained on the use of guns and he knew how to handle himself. He encountered Rosenbaum and he did not shoot Rosenbaum. And I think the same is true for Ryan Balch. He was an Afghan veteran and an Iraqi veteran, and he, for a fact, also was trained, and he didn't respond. So I think it's going to show that Kyle Rittenhouse didn't know how to use that weapon.
Right, great analysis. Thank you, Bernarda and Terry. Thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We will see you next time as we discuss justice in America.